There's a fierce battle being waged today between right and wrong. This battle is fought within the nation. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34 says, "Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people." Laws and government officials are ultimately extensions of the people. They are distilled versions of what a culture wants, or at least what it tolerates. When a nation is steeped in sin and rebellion against God, there are natural consequences. The strength of a nation might result in military or economic power, but the source of real strength is in the nation's moral character. Law and government will always turn to the desires of the people eventually. The presence of righteous individuals and families make a nation strong, but wickedness in individuals and families degrades a nation and weakens it. The book of Judges reveals these truths. When the people of Israel did what was right in their own eyes, but wrong in God's eyes, Israel succumbed to her enemies. However, when the people called out to the Lord, He delivered the nation from their enemies. This battle is also fought in the family. Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 40 says, "You shall therefore keep His statutes and His commandments which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, that you may prolong your days in the land which the Lord your God is giving you for all time." We'll talk about this a little bit more in our lesson today as we get farther into it. The battle is also fought in the church. Jude chapter 1 and verse 3, "Beloved, while I was very diligent to write to you concerning our common salvation, I found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints." Jude writes to encourage his readers to aggressively defend the faith to which they have been taught. The core of these teachings are complete, so Jude writes that the faith was once for all delivered to the saints. Many may subtract from or add to those teachings, but to do so would corrupt the pure Word of God. An important parallel to Jude's teaching here comes from the life of the Apostle Paul. Like Jude, Paul valued the faith, and on his way to Jerusalem, not knowing what persecution awaited him there, Paul summoned the leaders of the Ephesus church to meet him. And he told the leaders that when he ministered in Ephesus, he had preached faithfully, but warned that false teachers would soon emerge from the midst. They would try to distort the truth in order to draw away the disciples after them. And this battle is fought within the individual. And we are commanded to submit to God, resist the devil, and flee from you. In the previous verses here in James chapter 4, James spelled out how the Christians had been living their lives of worldly self-reliance, trying to do it by themselves, relying only on themselves, as many of us have done at times. They had not committed themselves to they had committed themselves to getting what they wanted at all costs, but they refused to trust the God that they believed in to provide good for them. And so this battle between right and wrong has been fought for many years. And if you've ever read the book of Genesis, you'll know that this battle went very poorly in Sodom and Gomorrah. If you would like to turn to Genesis chapter 18, you have a rather lengthy reading. Very sure we're all familiar with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but I would like to talk about it this morning. Chapter 18 of Genesis, beginning in verse 16. "Then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, 'Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after them, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. And the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for those 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? So the Lord said, if I find Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. Then Abraham answered and said, indeed now, I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than 50 righteous. Would you destroy all of the city for lack of 5? So he said, if I find there 45, I will not destroy it. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there be 40 there. So he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 should be found there. So he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, indeed now, I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Beginning now in chapter 19. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground. And he said, hear now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go your way. And they said, no, but we will spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly. So they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we may know them carnally. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. And they said, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became very weary trying to find the door. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in this city, take them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be joking. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wives and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters. The Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass when they had brought them outside that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Then Lot said to them, please no, my lords. Indeed, now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, the city is near enough to flee to it, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said to him, See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, and that I will not overthrow the city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore the name of the city was named Zor. The sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zor. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land, which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Then Lot went up out of Zor and dwelt in the mountains. His 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zor. And his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. Now the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old. Is there no man on the earth, to come into us, as is custom on the earth? Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. And I'll end reading there. So Abraham stands before God there in Genesis chapter 18 and pleads with him to spare the city for even just 10 righteous souls. And so God promises, if you find 10 righteous, I will not destroy the city for the sake of those 10. But apparently there were not even 10 righteous souls in Sodom and Gomorrah. The wickedness of that place and time is so notorious that it is even remembered today. And throughout the New Testament, Christ and others used Sodom to represent the wickedness that was in the world. And there are so many valuable lessons that we can learn about the consequences of allowing the world to enter our hearts as it did the family of Lot. Not only did Lot's family live in Sodom, Sodom lived in Lot's family. That was the problem. So I'd like to consider the consequences that follow this tragic state when Sodom lived in Lot's family. When Sodom lived in Lot's family, respect for superiors declined. Chapter 19 and verse 14, you'll see where Lot goes to his sons-in-law and tells them, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But to his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. So as Lot is informed that the city, their home, is going to be destroyed, his objective is not to save the city, but to save his family. Unfortunately, though, it is immediately noticed that the sons-in-law of Lot must have not been very spiritually minded, and actually take his warning as some kind of joke. Nor did they hold much respect for Lot to quickly take his warnings to be a joke. They did not respect the older and wiser Lot as they should. And in a matter of hours, their lack of respect for their superiors would cause them to be among those who were destroyed in Sodom and Gomorrah. If only they had possessed some respect for their superiors, perhaps they would have been spared. And so when Sodom, or the world, lives in our hearts today, respect for our superiors declines. And the biggest example I thought about this would be for kids or teenagers around my age or so not respecting their parents. But I also thought another example is good when you think about our government. And do you love every single person who is in office in our country right now? Whether it be the president, somebody who is in Congress, or the governor, Is there anybody you don't like? Or is everyone in office someone you voted for? See, regardless of the president in our country, there is always a large group of people who would go as far as to say that they hate the president. Why does the president need so much security? Because people hate him so much to the point that they would like to assassinate the president. It's happened in our history. And so because one person may vote for a Republican candidate, they have zero respect for the Democratic candidate. And if one may vote for the Democrat, they have no respect for the Republican candidate. But aren't we told in Romans chapter 13 that we are to respect and obey the authority that is above us? No matter who is above us, whether it be at a smaller scale or even just the elders of a church or even up to the government, we should be respectful of the ones who are superior and have power over us. And when Sodom lived in Lot's family, there was a reluctance to flee evil. Verse 15, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city." And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hands, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. The angels had to lead Lot and his family out of Sodom. They were reluctant. They were very hesitant. And do not forget the sins that they are leaving behind. In Sodom, there is homosexuality. You see that when it says everybody in the city was surrounding Lot's home to get in there with the men who were in there. Homosexuality and just overall complete unrighteousness. And despite the horrible sin and the evil being committed here, it was difficult for them to leave. Note that Lot's son-in-laws didn't leave. Today, Christians are still commanded to flee the evils of this world. We are to flee any sin that comes up in this world. And we must be quick to leave it. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20 says, "Woe to you who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." In this particular verse, the prophet Isaiah is describing one of the sins that the Jewish people are guilty of, which ultimately led to their destruction of the northern kingdom and later to the destruction of the southern kingdom. And this is not the only sin mentioned in this passage. There is an abuse of alcohol, dishonesty, corruption, and arrogance before God, or other violations that were cited. These things are serious enough, but in verse 20, Isaiah describes not just a sinful act, but rather what this sinful nation has come to. They were so wicked and proud that they celebrated and promoted what was evil and labeled as evil what had traditionally been seen as good. Does that not sound somewhat familiar? Evil has turned to good for so many people that they don't know the difference. Now, we don't necessarily use these terms today, the call evil good and good evil, anymore. Today, there are more subtle ways of deconstructing the moral order set by God in His Word. People use statements like, love is what matters. Every lifestyle deserves respect. We must guarantee everybody's right. Gender equality, marriage equality, a woman's right to choose. And one of my personal favorites, you don't want to be on the wrong side of history, do you? Consider James 4 and verse 4. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. We have to keep the world out of us. But too many are reluctant to distance themselves from activities or from groups that are undoubtedly evil. But when one leaves the world and gets on the safe ground of salvation, they should always remember that we are leaving condemnation, we are leaving the road to everlasting punishment, and we are leaving the misery and consequences of sin. If we are reluctant to leave the things of this world, then we will surely suffer eternally. When Sodom lived in Lot's family, fear reigned in place of faith. Lot was told by the angels that he would be safe in Zoar, but he too was very afraid, as you will read from verses 17 down through 22. Lot was so influenced by this sinful society that it was difficult for him to leave his home. And that is the effect that we still have today in a sinful world. The world encourages and breeds fear. The average child in America in 2004, couldn't quite find these statistics for today, but with the increase of technology and news, I assume this number is actually higher. The average child in 2004 would see 8,000 murders on TV and 100,000 acts of violence on the news by the time they ended 5th grade. There are also 628 different phobias that you can have. If you had ecclesiophobia, no, I'm not saying these right, that is the fear of church, and you're probably not here today. But you might have melophobia, the fear of music. Chromatophobia, the fear of money, or at least giving it up or putting it in the offering plate. Homophobia, fear of sermons. There's so many different fears that people have that we make up. The world breeds fear. And we live in a time in which we get the news immediately. If a kidnapping or a murder happens in California, we hear about it 5 minutes later, if not sooner. We hear stuff so quickly, and it just creates fear. We live in a world that creates fear. But in contrast, notice the advice that Paul gives in Ephesians chapter 6 in verse 10, be strong in the Lord. And the Christian has no reason to fear the threats of the world. Look at Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. When Sodom lived in Lot's family, desire for the world was stronger than a desire to obey God. Verse 26, but his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. This powerful lesson was learned in a very graphic way. God told Lot's family not only to leave Sodom, but to not even glance back at it. But Lot's wife was too attached to the city. Her glance back at the city proved to be faithful. Through the eye of lust, Lot's wife wanted just one more look. But for God, it was one look too many. With grim recall, Jesus simply says in Luke chapter 17 and verse 32, remember Lot's wife. There in Luke chapter 17, particularly from verse 20 and on, Jesus begins talking about the coming of the kingdom. I'm not sure how your guys' Bibles are set up, but mine is kind of set up into different paragraphs, as most of the Bibles I've seen are. So, for example, in Genesis 19, after verse 11, there's a new paragraph that says Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed. So you know, if you're looking for that, you know it's in that paragraph. And so right above verse 20 of Luke 17 says the coming of the kingdom. And so in the first few verses of this paragraph, Jesus explains how the kingdom is not of this world, or in other words, cannot be seen. Verse 20, the kingdom of God does not come with observation. Verse 21 goes on to say, nor will they say, see here or see there, for indeed the kingdom of God is within you. Now, for what we're trying to get at right now, these verses aren't necessarily what we're looking at, but rather the examples that Jesus gives. The first example that he gives is Noah in the ark. When he says in verse 27, they ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. That's not the only example that Jesus gives. He goes on to give the example of Lot and how he lived in Sodom and dwelt there. But one day Lot was led out and fire and brimstone was cast down on Sodom. And he warns us to not be like those in Sodom. Don't be like these son-in-laws of Lot who refused to leave the world. And don't be like the wife of Lot, where it was too difficult for her to leave. There was a hesitation to leave, and she turned back. So again, as Jesus warns in Luke chapter 17, there is a day of judgment that will come. And we must not have the world in our hearts, or have a longing to be in a sinful world rather than in heaven. Remember Lot's wife. Remember 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away in the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. And when Sodom lived in Lot's family, immorality had taken root in their actions. We see this in verse 30 through the end of the chapter after they left Zor. And we see that unfortunately the sinful problems that were taking place in Sodom were not completely destroyed even after the destruction. Sodom was still very much in the heart of Lot's daughters. They had regular contact with those in Sodom, and its influence got to them. Remember 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived, evil company corrupts good habits. Proverbs 15, verse 33 says, the fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. And so in a similar way, with Lot's daughters, we cannot feed ourselves with the evil of this world and not reap the consequences. We cannot take ourselves where Satan is and expect to escape his temptations and his influences. As it has been said before, you sit down with dogs, you rise up with fleas. You can try all you want to surround yourself with evil and not be affected, but you will be sadly wrong. Hosea chapter 8, verse 7, they sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. The stalk has no bud. It shall never produce meal. If it should produce, aliens would swallow it up. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7 says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. We reap what we sow. If you're merciful, mercy will be extended to you. If you are forgiving, you will receive forgiveness. Likewise, if you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven. But it is amazing how many people are deceived to this point. They think that they can sow their wild oats and never face the consequences. They do not stop to think that there is a time when they will have to harvest the fruit of their sowing. Paul said that if you sow to the flesh of the flesh, you will reap corruption. You will one day reap the consequences of the corrupt seed that has been sown. People think that they can mock the Word of God and get by with it, but there is a day of reaping coming. A day where we will reap what we sow. Sinners into everlasting punishment, righteous into eternal life. For some, it will be a good day. For some, it will be a very sad day. Doesn't that sound like a song? Of course it does. Number 336, if you'd like to turn there. Because you know me and I like singing songs. 336, there's a great day coming. There's a great day coming, a great day coming. There's a great day coming by and by. When the saints and the sinners shall be parted right and left. Are you ready for that day to come? There's a bright day coming. A bright day coming. There's a bright day coming by and by. But its brightness shall only come to them that love the Lord. Are you ready for that day to come? There's a sad day coming. A sad day coming. There's a sad day coming by and by. When the sinner shall hear his doom, depart, I know ye not. Are you ready for that day to come? There's a great day coming, a great day coming. There's a great day coming by and by. When the saints and the sinners shall be parted right and left. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? There's a bright day coming, a bright day coming. There's a bright day coming by and by. But its brightness shall only come to them that love the Lord. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? There's a sad day coming, a sad day coming. There's a sad day coming by and by. When the sinner shall hear his doom, depart, I know ye not. Are you ready for that day to come? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? Are you ready? Are you ready for the judgment day? It was never a sin for Lot and his family to live in the city of Sodom. The sin began when they allowed Sodom to live in them. John chapter 17 and verse 15. I do not pray that you shall take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. We unfortunately have to live in this world, a world that is full of sin and full of evil. But the world does not have to live in us. There's a great day coming. And are we ready for that day? Or are we reluctant to leave a world of evil? Are we hesitant to leave the sin of this world? We're going to go ahead and we're going to sing the song of invitation. And if there is anything that we can help you with, if you have trouble leaving the evil of this world, we can help you. We're here for each other. Walk with each other in our daily walk with Christ, helping each other get to heaven. Why else would we be here? So if there is any need that needs to be made known, please do so, for it's everlastingly too late. And at this time, let us stand while we sing the song of invitation. Jesus is calling.